Electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Well, happy Friday, Red Pill family. So glad you can join us on Conversations on the Fringe. I am your host, Jeff Spike Wong. And today we have a returning guest who I am so excited about. The gentleman is Keith Thompson. He is a seasoned journalist. He has written as well as books, a great author. But the conversation that he had with Josh about 3 years ago really hit home, and it really had a lot of substance, a lot of richness. They talked about alien abductions. They talked about near-death experience. They talked about consciousness within the world and interdimensionals. And these are all things that has some kind of a link and tie into it. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Keith Thompson. How are you, Keith?
I'm well, Jeff. It's great to be back, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, I am so excited because, I've been a fan of this show for years. And for me to end up being a host is just, it's one of those things that I can't even describe the elations. It's like being a guitar player in Kiss or something. It's just one of those opportunities that you never thought it would come. But again, the Conversations on the Fringe, the format and the theme that goes behind this particular show is what always intrigued me, because it was, again, off the beaten path. And then when you came in and started talking about UFO, and this, I believe, during the time when you had the book, the UFO Paradox, right? And you started talking about the Mississippi abduction and how it affects you as a human being. That itself start to talk about, okay, how do we deal with these type of things? And then, of course, you have your surfing experience. And I thought that was extremely just intriguing. Number one, you gave us a great tip. If you have riptides, swim along the shore. Fantastic. Because you know what? That saves lives right there. Right.
I live near a beach now. And every time I go to the beach, I continue to body surf. I love going out into waves. I'm a little more mindful about it now, but I now notice the signs, the signs that are, erected permanently, made of metal and wood, that have pictures that say, when in doubt, don't go out. And the main thing about a riptide is if you're caught, riptide is when you're being pulled back out. Meanwhile, the big waves that you're trying to ride are coming from behind you. So you fight to get back to shore. What you need to do, if you're ever in the waves, is go to the side, go laterally, because a riptide is like this. So swim that way or that way. Get out of the riptide. Don't fight the riptide.
Yes. And as a matter of fact, as soon as you described it, and it just like logic and everything just synced up and went, that makes so much sense. Like, that immediately would save you and your energy and also your ultimate outcome. But interestingly, that you had a near-death experience body surfing. And I would like to ask you this question. When you had that experience and you were able to hear the friend that was on shore talking and so forth, and you gave her back the experience, how much did that change you to recognize, now, wait a minute here. There's a whole bunch of other stuff out here that we've never even been taught or talked about until you personally experienced it.
Yeah, I did. First of all, I got to tell you, I'm old enough. I did not know about the phenomenon called NDE, near-death experience. They happened. They were known about, but in fact, Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, had been published. But I was in my 20s at the time. I was with friends in Hawaii. We went out to the beach to body surf. And it was a particularly legendary beach, Sunset Beach on the north edge of Oahu. And it was known as a surfing championship location. And there were signs that said, if in doubt, don't go out. In any case, I did go out. And I had an experience. I just want to stress, I didn't know about near-death experiences. I didn't know the framework.
Yeah.
We now know about the near-death experience through Oprah Winfrey,
Yeah.
through the popular books, popular media. We know the phenomenon, but I didn't know about it. So that said, I went out a little further than my ability level, and my friends were telling me to come back in while I still could, and then I realized I couldn't. That's because I was caught between the waves that were pulling me under and out, and the big waves coming from behind. So you're getting it from both directions. So I, of course, did what a body would do: is struggle, fight hard.
Yeah.
I'm make it in, and I exhausted myself. And there came a point when I had it was like a recognition. I'm not going to make it.
Wow.
And this is the end.
Yeah.
And I could hear my friends crying and crying my name, calling my name.
Yeah.
And the next thing I realized, the next impression or memory I had was of coming up from the what I thought was the ocean floor, just coming up from the floor of the ocean. And what I realized was I was above the ocean. My consciousness was above the ocean. And another thing I didn't know anything about at the time was a phenomenon called out-of-body experience.
Yeah.
Did not know of any such thing. Again, so much has come online in 30, 40 years. You can buy books, Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe, one of the best books on the out-of-body experience. So I was out of my body, and I knew it because I noticed there was this swimmer who was struggling in the water. And I noticed that was me. That was who I recognized myself to be. And there was, Jeff, there was this sense of peace and serenity. I heard my friend Mary, with her friend, she was on the beach calling for me to make it.
Yes.
And I responded. And when I say responded, I communicated with her, attempted to communicate with her that I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with this. What I meant was that I had come to a place of I had the thought. The thought was, oh, dead isn't dead.
Yes.
I thought I was certain that I was dying. Now, not at that moment. I didn't necessarily know that, but I told my friend. Well, so anyway, I then had an experience of the tunnel, which I did not know about, going through the tunnel at rapid speed, going to a place of seeing friends and relatives and family who had died, including an uncle, a great uncle, whose name was Sam. My family had an Uncle Sam, and I did not know that my Uncle Sam had died. He was there. I saw him. When I survived, and some time later, I asked my mom, who, by the way, I've learned very quickly when I survived this, a deep teaching that people have with near-death experiences, with UFO experiences, especially extreme experiences, spiritual emergencies of many different kinds, that it pays not to talk about these things. It's a great way to get people to back away from you slowly, like there's something really wrong. I, for example, when I did survive this experience, and I don't know how it happened, I did not have that moment that many near-death experiencers have when they're told by a voice, it's not your time, you must go back. I didn't have that, but all of a sudden, I was back looking through these eyes again. I was back in my body. I had gone from struggling to stay in my body, struggling to survive, to a place of absolute release, of seeing friends and relatives who were deceased, a sense of information, knowledge kind of downloading through me, a sense of deep wisdom that seemed, and yet it's very much like the psychedelic experience. When you're in the full throes of a psychedelic experience, you're aware that you're seeing more of what is, and you know that you're on the substance, you're on the drug, and when you come back, you're going to remember this and tell other people about it. The only problem is that much of what you find out there in that larger realm doesn't come back, or it gets filtered back. As you get filtered back into the body, it doesn't come back with you. So that reinforces my understanding that the brain does not produce consciousness. It filters consciousness. It's a receiver. And so the brain can only, and it's a filtering mechanism. It's an eliminative. It eliminates much of what reality is. And so trying to focus back down in. So that is one thing I did learn from this experience, is to be very careful who you talk about. So in any case, I was coming back into my body. My friends were wading out into the ocean to pull me out. And the first thing they said that I said to them was, "Did you see all that? Did you see?" And they said, "See all what?" And I stuttered and stammered to talk about a realm with deceased people. And I could tell very quickly, these were all my own peers. And we were all in our 20s. I could tell by the look in their face that they thought I had lost my mind. And because they too did not know about the near-death experience. They did not said, "Oh, you've had a near-death experience." They would say that now. That would be a common response. So here's the key. Here's a key understanding. That later that day, or actually it was the next day, we went back to the place where we were staying. We rented a house together, and I had a hot bath and dinner. And I was somewhat worse for the wear, had some cuts and scrapes, but unlike many near-death people who, if you've had a near-death experience and you've had your body mangled in an automobile accident, then you've got a long road of recovery. I had some grounding to do and some integration to do. So I remember the next day I said to my friend Mary, I said, "Mary, would you go with, I'm going to go on a walk. Would you come with me?" And she said, "Sure." I said, "I want to talk with you." And so I said to her, I heard, let me add one detail. I haven't told this story for a while. When my friend Mary and friends were on the beach, I heard her say, "Why didn't he listen? I told him it was too dangerous. I told him not to go out that far." And that's when I told her, "I'm fine. I survived, but not, I didn't survive. I'm dead, but I've survived." Consciousness doesn't depend on what we call life. I didn't have a sophisticated way of saying that.
Sure.
Experientially, that's what I knew to be so. And I didn't have the understanding that I had had a near-death experience. That was all beyond my pay grade at the time. So when we went on the walk, I said, "Mary, I heard what you said yesterday at the beach." She said, "What?" And I quoted it back. "Why didn't he listen? I told him not to go out. I told him it was too dangerous." Jeff, I can still see her face. I can still see how the blood drained from her face.
Yeah.
And she looked at me and I looked at her. Neither of us, well, there were no books, really. There was Moody's book, Life After Life, but we were too busy living life. We were in our 20s. We had not started reading this kind of material, and it was not widely known. So we didn't have sophisticated understandings of this, but we both knew if what I was describing was real, then this game is a lot bigger than any of us have thought. So we stayed in touch. She's now passed away. She had health problems, and I was with her really just a couple of days before she died. And she asked me if I would come to see her. And I said, "Of course I would." So I drove to her house where she was having hospice care, and the hospice people left us to be alone. And she said, how did she put it to me? She said, you heard what I said." This was more than a decade later.
Right.
You heard what I said on the beach. I said, I did. And she said, and you're still not afraid? I said, I'm not. Because what I had told her, and what I will tell you and your viewers, is that the one thing that I was aware of very quickly, whatever fear of death I had was gone. Now, I hadn't had a lot of experience of fear of death, but you kind of know fear of death by how creepy most people get about death. We all we tend to freak out about death and dying. We don't want to talk about it. We like to assure people. And I had a second nature that was comfortable with it, which manifested when my mother was in the hospice a couple of decades later. So we could talk about all that. But in any case, I sat with my friend Mary at the very end, and I said, no, I'm still not afraid. And then I said, and then she could tell I had something I wanted to say. And so she listened. I said, do you remember those times in your life when no matter how difficult it was for you, you didn't give up faith in being? You didn't lose your trust in being, in existence? She said, yes. And her face lit up. And then I said, keep that up.
Yeah.
Keep that up. In other words, you're about to die and you have nothing to worry about. I'm not an expert on where she was going, what she would, but I was certain that consciousness survived. By that time, my life had changed. I had, because of these experiences, they changed how I worked, how I reported as a writer. If I'd not had these experiences, I probably would not have made this beat my work. But I'm what William James called a radical empiricist. Empiricism is trusting experience or taking experience to heart and investigating experience, even far out, especially far out, wild facts.
Yes.
He called them wild facts. So I've devoted my career. I didn't set a mission to do this, but I had made my career the beat of exploring wild facts. And I had already gotten interested in the UFO phenomena, not from an experience I had, but actually experience I had as a 6th grade student giving a classroom report. So we could maybe go into that if you want as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things that recently, I would say it actually got the momentum at 2020 when we had that lockdown. And what I recognized that because there was a lot of talk about this great awakening, that was an underlining consciousness shift. In other words, there was a group of people that was pushing this. So it hasn't become mainstream at that time, but when we had that lockdown, it made a lot of people question. So the connection within the consciousness to the spirituality of self, I think, had a lot of time to marinate, to develop and mature a bit. And from that, it started to open up more so and start to be more accepting, start to question the establishment, if you will. Because, UFO has been out there for a long time. As I said to you before we got on, is that, Eric Van Doniken was putting out Chariots of the Gods very beginning of the 70s, talking about ancient aliens. There's the stories of, Betty and Barney that you mentioned in the 60s. And of course, in Texas, there was a town in the late 1800s that they actually had a burial of this. So throughout history, there's always been peppered through, but somehow we shifted. Because prior to this, I think the only disclosures or concepts that we've gotten is through entertainment. And, by watching movies or televisions and so forth. And that entertainment disclosure, it's almost tongue in cheek. It's the same thing I always said to the audience about witchcraft. When you're looking at witchcraft and you don't really understand it, you're taking Hollywood basically as the rule of thumb, you're totally missing the boat. So when we're here now, the consciousness, especially with UFOs, that one of the things that I think was mind-blowing when we start to understand is crafts may not be from outer space. It may be interdimensional, multi-timelines. And then it's not a so-called science technology operational, but an organic consciousness movement as a whole. Your opinion on that?
Well, that's a great insight, and I want to share an anecdote. Maybe some of your viewers know about this, about the role of the French astronomer Jacques Vallee. He started out. He had a UFO sighting as a boy with his mother in Paris or outside of Paris. Wasn't up close, but it remained a mystery to him. When he became an astronomer, worked at an observatory, he had a profound experience. He and his team were tracking what they called an uncorrelated target, something in the sky that didn't have permission to be there, which is one of my definitions, unauthorized presence.
Yeah.
We need to start erecting signs, unauthorized presence. Violators will be ticketed. And the violators are those who report unauthorized presence, whether it's something in the sky or something at the edge of death, psychic experiences, telepathic precognitive dreams. These are all part of a larger pattern. In any case, Vallee was working for an observatory, and they had a tape. They created a radar sighting, and they created the tape of it as a record. So Vallee went to the director of the observatory afterwards and said, "May I have that tape so that we can investigate it?" He said, "No, Jacques, we erased it." You erased it? Why? He said, it didn't fit. It was not relevant. Now, the right interpretation here would not be to say that the director of the observatory was in on the conspiracy, quote unquote. The conspiracy is a larger frame for what we shut out when it doesn't fit. So he simply was saying, now he probably had in his own unconscious, he was troubled by what his team had reported. So he wanted to get rid of it, but it wasn't part of a government conspiracy. It's too easy. We miss the larger signal when we relate it to a literal conspiracy. Not that there aren't real conspiracies, by the way, that the government is in on. So in any case, I go back to Vallee. He was originally generally an advocate of the ET hypothesis for explaining UFOs. And then in the late 60s, he felt kind of a personal calling to explore larger patterns. He wrote a book called Passport to Magonia. Magonia was a legendary realm in folklore. And so what he really did was break company with the mainstream UFO researchers and said, this is part of a larger pattern. These phenomena have been with us for generations, that if they go back to the beginning of time as we know it, all cultures have accounts of interactions that share the same structure, same archetypes. So just as people today are abducted by aliens in spacecraft, that in the fairy culture, the fairy faith, children were abducted by fairies.
Yes.
Now, the mainstream of UFO research says Jacques has lost the plot. He thinks it's all just folklore. He said, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying folklore is more than we know. To say that it's just folklore, say that it's just myth. Myth is a category that we have for certain realms of experience and history that we can't explain. So he absolutely broke the whole conversation open. And that had a huge impact on me because I was then able to say, this is part of the UFO. It's real, by the way. A UFO, here's what happens. This is a classic phenomenon. The UFO comes in, appears to be a craft. It shows all the sensors record that it's got a heat pattern consistent with a material object, shows up on radar, consistent with an object. Sometimes they break tree branches as they land, and they have burn marks on the ground. And then they break into 2 or 3 craft, and then the craft break into different shapes, balls of light. Some of the lights descend into the ground. Some disappear the way an old-fashioned TV set goes off. Yeah. He said, this is not your daddy's flying saucer anymore. These are objects that move across a spectrum of the material to the immaterial. So that's the key. It doesn't explain how, because Western science says that there is a firm division between matter and mind. There are phenomena that question this all the time, that transgress the boundary between matter and mind. If I have a dream that I'm going to be walking around the corner and see my Aunt Marie, and then the next day I'm walking down the street, I recognize the corner, and I turn, and there's my Aunt Marie. That's called a precognitive dream.
Yeah.
So that's what we call the paranormal, which is a nice little buzz phrase. Well, that sort of explains it. It's a paranormal experience. It doesn't explain how paranormal experiences can happen. Western science, Western philosophy says they don't happen because they can't happen. That's not science anymore.
Right.
That's like religious thinking. So here's going back to, this is a long segue on what you're talking about popular entertainment. Vallee got a call from Steven Spielberg back in the 70s. He said, could you come to my studio? I'm working on a movie that I'm calling Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He knew about Vallee's work. He knew about the book Passport to Magonia. He understood that Vallee had framed this phenomenon as part of a larger frame. It was not necessarily extraterrestrial. So they spent days on the set together, going back and forth. And he picked Jacques Vallee's mind, on his vast mind, on the paranormal dimensions of this. And then it became clear to Vallee one day that how Spielberg was planning to end the movie with the classic mothership landing. He was going to resolve the phenomenon definitively as a flying saucer, a vast saucer. You remember the French scientist Lacombe in the movie Close Encounters? That was modeled after Vallee. And you remember the sign with the hand and the 5 tones, do 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 do, and the hand gestures. It became known as the handshake. Vallee said to Spielberg, Steven, don't resolve this with a handshake. It's not that definitive. Because what Vallee knew was that Spielberg was on the verge of resolving the phenomenon definitively. And once Spielberg did make it an extraterrestrial craft, that would shape all future understanding of the phenomenon. And Spielberg said to Vallee, he says, Jacques, I understand exactly what you're saying. I've read your own evidence. I know it is more complicated than that. Yeah. And he paused. He said, but I work in Hollywood, and people want the handshake. They want the hand sign to be what brings in a craft. I'm gonna end this with a definitive mothership landing. Vallee knew what it meant, that it would enforce as certainty something that was not quite that certain, that these were actual craft that came in and came out. They certainly do appear to be craft, and that's part of the paradox. To this day, Vallee tells this story, and anyway, that's an example of how Spielberg's movie had an enormous, outsized influence in shaping our expectation that this would be something that was going to, now in today's language, the disclosure language, it's all we've got to do is break open the locks on the hangars at McDonnell Douglas or Lockheed Martin, and we're going to find the recovered craft that had been reverse engineered. I would love it if there were such an ending. I follow the disclosure stuff very closely. People ask me, is your book or your other book, Angels and Aliens, do you cover disclosure? And I always laugh. I said, it's all about disclosure. The disclosure is ultimately about the nature of reality, that such events happen that we can't explain. No, I know what they mean. Do you cover the government disclosure and the government cover-up? And I said, no, not in the way that the disclosure movement does. My own interest in disclosure is in this larger sense that we're not going to be able to come to terms with this with our worldview intact. That's what I will say. It's a larger reality that includes this reality, but it is not reducible to ordinary time and space as we know it.
And
No.
is this due to reasons of that our own evolution and progression just doesn't have the aptitude? I mean, it just seems to be when you look at social media and you look at the group of violence and the group of religion fanatics, and you look at all these little basically boxed in consciousness, if you will, and how they are behaving. And this is 2026, and they're still following tradition 2,000 years ago. To me, and I've always said this, traditions are overrated. You need to break those paradigms. Just because somebody did something prior to and taught it to you doesn't mean it's good for you. And yet, when we have a president such as Donald J. Trump now coming out saying, we're going to do an alien disclosure, UFO disclosure, the first thing I thought is, please don't just give me some, so-called pseudoscience bullshit, because that's not a disclosure whatsoever. Just for the simple fact that we're still being shown jet propulsion going to space, it's an insult to my intelligence. So where is your take on regards to how far can we move this in humanity, or are we going to end up being separated? Like they said, not everybody's going to come.
I don't think we can expect much. Let's just take the premise of the idea that the government has been withholding information. The answer to that is yes.
Yeah.
The first question is, what are they withholding? My bet, and I'm not a betting guy, I don't like to hang around Vegas. I don't think I'll do very well in Vegas if I do.
Yeah.
My bet, if I were to bet, is that what the government is largely not revealing, the government is concealing, is that they don't understand what this is. We don't know what it is. I don't believe, but I'm open to, no, I could be wrong. Could very well be that these craft do routinely crash. They get recovered. They always get recovered by the government. They don't ever land, they don't ever crash in Central Park. They don't crash in Milwaukee at rush hour. So apparently the craft are sometimes pristine, like they've been left. It always tends to be the disclosure advocates. And I'm willing to be wrong. I'm willing to be mistaken. My hunch could be wrong, could be inaccurate. But until somebody goes beyond, I talked with someone who told me as much as they could tell me. No, it can't keep stopping there. So that's not to. So what do I say? My own view is that we cannot expect that if there is a government cover-up, can we now expect that the very custodians of that cover-up are going to come completely clean? I mean, where's the logic in that? Where else in places where there have been secrets? In a family, where a family does family therapy, which is a phenomenon where the entire family goes to therapy because there's a realization that there are long-term patterns that are in the level of the family.
Yeah.
The family doesn't come in willingly. There's usually a crisis in the family. Involves someone's drinking, someone's drug abuse, sometimes it's sexual abuse. Now, what people say, what are you talking about? I'm talking about how secrets are held. And the system needs something from outside of itself to break open a level of healing. So I'm waiting for some evidence of the recovered craft, the retrieved craft. Everybody, and we know the names in the movement. I respect it. It's just not a beat that I have covered, but I've covered the coverage of it. Yeah. And I by the way, speaking of Spielberg, we're just a few weeks out now from this next film, which he's decided to call Disclosure Day, which I think is brilliant because he's going to play with the term disclosure. And it looks like from the coming attraction, the trailer to that movie, he's got a couple of them out, it looks like he's holding a nice line between the two kinds of disclosure. The movie involves characters who are indeed racing to break open the government cover-up. So that's one level of the plot. The other level is that in the process of doing that, they are constantly bombarded with paranormal, psychic, time-space bending phenomena. So there's the other disclosure. And every time I see Spielberg, he does not make clear that he's on one side of the disclosure or not. He thinks that the disclosure movement, going back to the New York Times story of 2017, disclosing the secret, no longer secret Pentagon study group, he thinks that is significant and it's real, and that'll probably be part of the next movie, Disclosure Day. So that's out in June, and it will probably as Close Encounters did, it will probably shape the discourse considerably.
Yeah. And I don't know for the better or for the worse, because the way Hollywood operates, they spin, you know, and I get the safety in number thing, meaning that, you know, there's no way a government can come out and say certain aspect of the truth without just people going ape and having a total panic. And one of the things that, you know, that's been talked about the last decade is off-planet civilizations. Whether we have a super army that is doing intergalactic, there seems to be some evidence, but yet no one can actually give you proof of it. So that's the thing that's the fine line that we're facing here between what is the actual factual proof that you can give me on, let's say, the program 20 and back or Solar Warden or anything that's been discussed, to all the way to, oh, by the way, kids are being taken away for our DNA testings and food source. There's really no explanation how 500,000 kids are disappearing constantly. And it doesn't seem to be some of the countries, especially, let's say, South Africa or in Africa continent, especially the Asian Pacific area, rim, India, that level of poverty has never been raised. For what reason? Because it's easier to poach poor people and take their kids. So for us here at 2026, some of us are waking up going, wait a minute here. The children issue is what's going to solidify us by, you know, the Q posts and so forth. And yet the Epstein file, who is supposed to be the catalyst of this, and people being named, just that's it. It's like an advertising, a commercial. So in your, let's say, in your feeling of it, in your inner self and true self, where do you think the next step needs to be for us to give humanity a better foot forward so we can combat whatever this darkness that we're facing?
Well, I'm not a body language expert, there are those people. I watched a couple of the shows on YouTube every now and then. There's a group of guys, what are they called? They've got a podcast, and they take public figures, like in the John Benet Ramsey case.
Yeah.
And they look at John Ramsey and Patsy Ramsey, the mother. Does the body language feel consistent with they didn't do it? In any case, when I watched Donald Trump, and the way he offhandedly talks about this, he says, in his kind of usual stream of consciousness sense, he says, there are people who think this is real. Myself, I don't know. It could be, maybe not. Almost like Jackie Mason, the Jewish comic. Yes. He says, I'm not a believer myself, but we don't know. So we certainly should put out more information. Secrets aren't good. That's not a guy who's been read into some secret. Because I don't think he has the psychological, I don't think most people have the psychological capacity. And as for Obama, on, was it Jimmy Kimmel or Fallon or one of the night shows? Right. And he recently had, more recently as an ex-president, he said, yeah, the aliens are real, but I can't say more. And then he quickly came out to say, there may be something real. So then people, connect those two statements. I think there's a general sense in which politicians know they can kind of joke about this.
Yes. And
I don't think that they're read in. In fact, Vallee has said that he has, again, I have a lot of respect for Vallee. But when even Vallee says he knows people who tell him again, is he has his own clearances that he's gotten in order to be a researcher. So when he says he's told that the president isn't read in because the president is not considered to have a need to know. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, interesting.
That there's a permanent government.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of evidence for a national security state called the deep state.
Yes.
I'm actually glad that language is more fully realized. With the Kennedy assassination, clearly did not get the full story.
Right.
So anyway, I don't tend to go down those rabbit holes, if you will, because I tend to cover the rabbit holes. I tend to cover that people do go down them, and I wait to see if they get out. You know, David Wilcock just passed away, longtime researcher, and he became, I'd have to say, and I think you probably would agree, this phenomenon did not treat him well, because he either knew or felt he knew information that if the rest of us knew, we would be as devastated as he. And he eventually, it appears to be alleged to be a suicide. I'm not going to go down the road about whether he was suicided.
Right.
But I will say that there are a significant number of people in this field who don't thrive with the darkness very well. So there's partly a self-protective mechanism I have. I'm willing to follow evidence, but I'm not willing to simply entertain speculation as real unless I have some reason to.
Sure.
So I don't expect a definitive government disclosure.
Yeah.
But I think you mentioned consciousness. I think that there is something to be said for the fact that in the past 40, 50 years, large numbers of people in the West have, for example, taken up meditation and other consciousness changing practices to study consciousness, to develop attention, to change attention, to explore depths of awareness that has not been mainstream before. There has also been the psychedelic revolution, the original era in the 1960s with Ram Dass, Richard Alpert, and Timothy Leary, and then how their antics led to a complete draconian close down of all the research, and we're only now beginning to allow that to come back to the surface and begin to look at the therapeutic benefits. In any case, the psychedelic exploration did not go away. So to the degree, I think the disclosure is going to come as more and more people find that they are becoming directly aware of something in our midst.
Right.
So I tend to agree with Whitley Strieber and other researchers who say, we are the disclosure. Talk to the witnesses. Talk to the witnesses. You still have leading UFO organizations that are so intent on trying to get credibility that they only deal with the hardware issues.
That's right.
And they don't want to deal with abductees because it's messy. Yeah, it's messy. Whatever's going on in abductions, these are real experiences. What are the events? What are the full dimensions of the events that lead to the experiences? What happens to an abductee in an abduction experience? Is it 100% literal as they frame it, or is it a temporary opening of larger dimensions that are like the shamanic world? This is why in my work I take shamanism. The shaman in the traditional culture was that figure who lived at the very edge of the community, very edge of the tribe, had a marginal, what's called a liminal being. He was today would be institutionalized in a psychiatric setting. But the shaman was the one who you would go to resolve a problem that would involve the need to talk with beings at the lower, intermediate, and higher realms. The shaman was a figure who could organize back and forth between this realm and what we would call the spiritual realms. Well, imagine that what we're seeing in our midst is the shamanic ability becoming more widespread through psychedelics, through meditation, through various techniques for altering consciousness,
Yeah.
lucid dreaming, even the apps we see now on YouTube. You'll sleep better if you use white noise, white sound. That's true. White sound does create conditions for deeper sleep, but that means more people are going to be having access to their dreams, to the dream world. What I'm getting at here, Jeff, is that we may be seeing a thinning of the membrane between the material and the spiritual world, and maybe the dream zone is more than just the personal unconscious. The dream realm is what Jung called the collective unconscious. And that's where there's real information and real gold.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Because I resonate deeply with that, and I do believe the shamanic approach is the truth about community awareness, community help, community assistance, because that's basically what the shaman does. And overall, we can't neglect any disclosure being greater than personal experience. Once you have that, you cornerstone something that only you can explain to yourself. You can try to convince others, but it doesn't really work that way. This is our individual experience. And the things I personally experience, of course, is so vast compared to some of my friends or even family members. And there is no discussion actually on some of the topics just because it's so personal to me. It makes no sense to anybody else. So, Keith, that is just fantastic. I think information and nuggets that you're bringing to the table. I think it'll help everybody to kind of to explore the consciousness of self, and of course, empowering by wanting to quest for knowledge, opposed to just waiting for someone to give it to you and then assimilate other people's thoughts. And I don't think that's what we're here for. So with that, let's talk about the book you're working on that's going to come out this year. And give me a second here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up that file. I can't really see you. Now, this is one of the things about my screen. All right. Okay, I'm going to open that up. So tell us a little bit about the inspiration and how you got involved on writing this book.
Well, the next book is, as you see from the title, there's Anomalous Phenomena. Then the interesting subtitle, which I went back and forth with the publisher quite a bit, Apports and the Mystery of Objects that Materialize and Translocate. Apport is a French word for phenomena that have become associated with physical seances, the physical phenomena that materialize in seances. The book came about with my editor at my publisher, who, after I had written the UFO Paradox, said, have you given thoughts to parallels between the UFOs and apports? Again, apports are phenomena that materialize, come in, and sometimes dematerialize or translocate. Objects that you are absolutely convinced are lost and are missing, then show up under circumstances that are very likely not chance. So I said, well, UFOs are like apports. They do appear and they register as physical phenomena, and then they disappear. They break up into balls of light, as I said earlier. So we decided my next book would be to put UFOs in this very larger category that I've been describing, and look at a whole range of mind matter anomalies that absolutely confound the Western model. And so that's what the next book is about. That's why we chose the title Anomalous Phenomena, namely a whole range of phenomena that do not fit the Western framework. And it was a great book to work on. It comes out in October from Inner Traditions.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this. I could see the topics in the subject and in all the little interweaving aspect of this is something that I think will connect overall, just away from the question of UFOs. It's a spacecraft, and it comes into our world, and it's a little green men or little gray men. And, we kind of went through all that. And it's interestingly that how the connection now start to go into much deeper. I think definitely time placement, that itself, we really never, I think, go away from Hollywood when we talk about time travel, because that's the only thing that we ever talked about. But recently we're talking about gravitational, anti-gravitational, and all these things works with time travel. How did that tie in? Right. Of course, the government's been doing the remote viewing thing. And if you can take your consciousness, go somewhere, isn't that time travel? The movie Somewhere in Time with Christopher Reeve is an example of this. He went back to meet the girl of his dreams. That's time traveling, but he never left the hotel. It was all within the consciousness. So these are such the subjects that I think opens up doors, because I'm sure there's folks out there that has personal experience that just went, now, wait a minute here. Something like this happened to me, and I never knew how to explain it. I never knew how to talk about it. So this is fantastic. And I'm so glad that you're sharing this with all of us and opening up this UFO phenomenon in a total different way, and give us another, I think, level of approach to how to assimilate, how to understand. Because this is of course my point of view of this, is I see the universe as an ocean, if you will. That energy is just like if we stood out and looking at the Pacific Ocean and whatnot. You can take a bucket and pull out a little bit of it and go, okay, within this has this involved in it. But the ocean still exists. So therefore, if we believe, whether it's to be paranormal of ghost apparitions, or we interdimensionals of people traveling through stargates, do they all exist? My answer is absolutely. If it's in your consciousness, like you said earlier, we're here to filter it. We don't actually produce it. I've learned that decades ago when I was doing a lot of psychedelics, because after coming back from these experiences, I would have, of course, an entire personality revamp, if you will. But like you said, it was hard to bring everything back. So I started taking notes and then start reading my notes. And as you will, know that some of your notes are just like, what are you doing here? What are you writing? Because when you come back, you couldn't understand it. But there was definitely things that I wrote that I came back and went, yes, this is gold right here, And I hope that we have a society that wants to question our reality and our existence in that level, because I think that's the ultimate truth, how we're going to stop, number one, this so-called violence on this planet. This is something that I just absolutely cannot stand, the level of violence. And then, of course, the violence and degradation to our feminine, to our the divine feminine and female. Somehow, somewhere, that particular belief system got drilled so hard into the humanity consciousness that it still exists. And then, of course, the aspect of the unionship, everybody wants to have sex, but not everybody wants to make love and have the magic of unity or unionship, because they don't understand it, because it's not being taught. So then they utilize that against us, especially men, in sense as a weapon with pornography. So now all of a sudden we're even more frazzled than ever. We're never going to be centered because we're so misunderstood regards to our personal power, or within the essence of true sense of self. So let's take that, what I just said, if you will. Keith, give us your last thoughts in regards to where humanity sits. And does this UFO disclosure really matter? Or is something else that we really should be paying attention to?
Well, I don't know what's going to come of the conversation called disclosure. I'm struck that the two of the leading figures. One, David Grush,
Yeah.
said we're just on this is 4 years ago now. We're on the verge of evidence that's going to come out. Trust me, or don't trust me, but it's going to come out. And it still hasn't come out. About a year and a half ago, a guy named Jake Barber said that he showed films, videos with what is the TV host's name? In any case, of recovering an egg, a luminous egg, craft. And that was another departure point. There was going to be a big breakthrough. There's a kind of coming up against the edge of disclosure and then a falling back, like an ebb and flow. So I think in that sense, disclosure is the way we've agreed to talk about our own growing recognition that our maps and theories of reality are too small. I often say that when they're in any sub-dimension of this, the UFO phenomenon, the near-death experience, the vast amount of evidence now for paranormal capacities, both in the laboratory experimental setting as well as spontaneous psychic experiences, when we have consistent bodies of evidence that are larger, that point to territories larger than our maps, then one response is to, well, then it couldn't be real because it's not on our maps. The other response is finally said, well, if it's not on our maps, maybe it's the maps that are the problem. We need larger, more accurate maps. We need maps that put territories that exist onto their mappings. So by mappings, I don't really mean in the old-fashioned sense of cartography that the sailors and the voyagers like Christopher Columbus had, maps of the New World. But I mean maps metaphorically. And when we're living in a time when I think our theories are expanding. Neuroscience, there are growing numbers of young neuroscientists who have come of age using psychedelics. They have practiced meditation. They have experienced changes in their own consciousness. So it was one of the physicists who said, I forget which one, but in any case, a paradigm changes one funeral at a time. Members of the old order die off. You don't have to be morbid to see that that's true. So there are researchers, there are scientists who the old materialist framework who will not open to the possibility, no matter how much evidence there is. So what is required is for them to gradually leave. And a new generation of scientists who are willing to say, let's look at the evidence, even if it requires that we revise our maps. That's where I think things are positive now. So as cautionary as I've been about taking anything within the UFO phenomenon at face value, that's not to say nothing is going on. It's to keep an open mind to say, I don't know when you don't know. And let the I don't know be a prod to further inquiry. I'm very skeptical of those who have all the answers. The debunkers always know that there's nothing going on here. I write them off, therefore. If nothing is ever going on, that's not science. Meanwhile, the ones who have all the answers on our side, so to speak, who overstate how good the evidence is, we're in an in-between phase right now, in which mind and matter are doing this shimmering oscillation, this dance, as we see that mind and matter are not separate. It couldn't be separate. Synchronicities could not happen. Profound coincidences that are connected at the psychic realm that happen, that call materialism into question, could not happen if mind and matter were not connected in ways that we don't understand. So it's a waiting game. I think we're living in a time when the constraints are lessening, are lifting for being open to experiences that don't fit, impossible experiences that nevertheless happen.
Yeah, thank you. That's definitely a deeper thought into where we're at. And I would like to ask this: is our humanity consciousness thrive off comfort? And is this the reason why it's taken so much longer for it to reach more people just out of comfort, because lack of comfort seems to be the biggest disturbance in our society. Oh, how about that?
It's taking us out of our comfort zone.
Okay. So there is level of, well, interesting thing. If you have no fear, right? Because of the understanding of the near-death experience has changed your point of view. And of course, from that point, your consciousness expanded, your experience expanded, you understand more. Like I often tell my grandkid, I have no fear. And that literally is that there's nothing really to be scared about. Even at the darkest and the negative that ever comes within our circle of reality, it's not fearful, right?
On the last day of my mother's life, when I sat with her at a hospice in Naples, Florida,
Yeah.
I watched in the room, I watched shimmering lights hovering over her body. She was in a coma. And I had never really heard at that time of deathbed experiences. There are deep traditions of the dead coming to welcome the newly dying and then preparing for them to leave their body. And so I watched this completely flabbergasted, and I felt the room fill with the presence. And shortly thereafter, my mother died, and the hospice attendant knocked on the door and said, "Is everything okay?" And I said, "Well, yes, my mother just died, but that's okay." And she said, "I felt called to come here because I felt some sense of something had happened." You want to find people who give witness to extraordinary phenomena. Talk to a hospice nurse, a male or female. They're the ones who deal with the actual death process. And you'll find that there is a great deal of openness to phenomena. They learn to talk about it carefully too. They don't want to be called woo-woo. But the ones who are closest. So anyway, the near-death experience is one major opening for me. And I think interestingly, many of the researchers now who are doing the best work are former materialist physicians who would never have believed it. But then they talk with their patients when they come back from surgery, and they report things involving telepathic and clairvoyant experiences when they were considered to be under anesthesia. And it's mind-blowing for the doctors. So the best researchers are those researchers who once would have never taken any of this as having the slightest bit of credibility.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible, Keith. Hour just flies by when we're on this conversation. I know we can go on for a lot more. What is your parting word for our Red Pill audience here? The nugget of wisdom.
Well, I'll just do a little standard bit of people who want to contact me. My website is www.thompsonatlarge.com. All one word, thompsonatlarge.com. So that's where find out more about my books, Angels and Aliens, the UFO Paradox, and my new book, Anomalous Phenomena. So, I pitch the books because that's my deepest work. That's where what I've written it can be found. Far more than we can discuss here in an hour, although I'd love the opportunity to talk with you again.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much, Keith, for appearing and coming back to Conversation on the Fringe. Every time we get onto a deep conversation, I always feel enlightened. I feel lifted. I feel optimistic. That's really a nice thing. And I see the energy level and the glow that you bring to the world. And I thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff.
So with that, happy Friday, audience. Everybody, with much love. Don't forget, the thumbs up thing this way. And then subscribe and definitely share. The more we get this type of information out there, the more we can get the thinking process moving, the consciousness expanding. So therefore, maybe that makes the difference between someone who is suffering to someone who becomes enlightened. And with that, thank you so much. And we'll see you on the next Conversations on the Fringe.
I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. The air is unfit to breathe, and our food is unfit to eat. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation. I want you to get mad.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
The more you fuck around, the more you're going to find out.
These people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy.
We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. It's as simple as that.
I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!